Okay, there we go. Sorry about that, guys. I don't know why it's happening on this account. It rarely happens on my main account, but for some reason, our last few spaces links that we've saved, whenever I launch them, they just don't start. So we're having to create these manually. In the future, I'm just going to go straight to creating them manually. We've tried now for a couple weeks, but either way, we appreciate you guys tuning in. Again, sorry for the couple-minute delay there. This is our 19th episode of Tesla Talk. It's a project by Sawyer Merritt, Whole Mars Blog, and Stock Talk Weekly. We've been doing it now, like I mentioned, for 19 episodes. Over 100,000 of you have tuned in those 19 episodes. So we genuinely appreciate all the support. Again, this does run every Thursday from 1 p.m. Eastern through 2 p.m. Eastern. We try to keep it tight, try to cover all the important topics for the week. And towards the end of the session, if we have time, we'll bring a few of you up for questions as well, and get into a little bit more of a spontaneous conversation. But I think we should kick it off with probably the biggest piece of news since the last show, which is the Tesla delivery numbers. There's a lot of talk, obviously, about Tesla not sharing the specific Cybertruck numbers. Some varying opinions on that. I certainly have an opinion on that. I think I agree with their decision to do so, especially considering the analyst expectations. But I'll throw it over to Sawyer first. Get your thoughts on the overall delivery numbers, the outlook, and then Omar, your thoughts as well, and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, I thought they were overall pretty good. They beat both the Bloomberg and the IR estimates, the analyst estimates. Um, SNX deliveries were at a 5-year high, which certainly surprised me, and I know it did many others. I think there were many reasons for that. They had many different incentives. You could transfer your lifetime free supercharging in Q4. Of course, prices were cut massively in early September. And then the Model X got eligible for the EV tax credit in early September. So there's sort of this huge wave of positive things that led to that growth. I think we'll see if that continues in 2024. I'm skeptical it will to the same level, but maybe prices are so good people are willing to snap it up, and maybe the people that maybe wanted a Cybertruck are like looking at the prices and the wait times now and be like, I don't know if I want to pay that. Maybe I'll just get a Model S and X. So maybe that's part of the reason too. I don't know. We'll see. Um, but overall, good numbers. I suspected they would bunch in the Cybertruck numbers with the Model S and X numbers. That's exactly what they did. I don't think the Cybertruck numbers are more than like 1 or 200. 200 is even too high, honestly, probably. So we'll see if they continue to do that. I would imagine like any Tesla semi deliveries are probably bunched in there as well, but it's probably only like a few. I hope they separate it into its own line item in the future. I think better transparency is good rather than just sort of bunching it in with the S and X. I'd like to see those numbers. I think it'd be good for investors. But yeah, those are just sort of the general quick thoughts. Good numbers, and I kind of wish production was at 500K. It was close to it before 95 ish. Um, but I think they'll get that in Q1.
Yeah, I think the Cybertruck numbers are basically sort of immaterial at this point. I think Elon mentioned in a tweet that they had not more than a couple hundred deliveries. So in the future, I could see them possibly breaking it out into its own category. But at this stage, they probably don't want to sort of expose themselves at that level to how the ramp up is going. So once it reaches a more steady state of production, I could see them possibly breaking that out. But, I think I'd seen some analyst estimates of like 2,000 units. I don't think it was anywhere close to that. We're looking at probably, a few hundred units at most. So I think it's going to be super exciting to see that product ramp. It's interesting to see S and X sales really rising to their highest level in years. I do think that with autos, there's definitely a sort of delayed elasticity of demand. It doesn't always, in the quarter that these price changes happen, sort of reflect on the sales numbers. But then as people come to upgrade their cars, when their lease ends or their auto loan is over, then they might go and look at the cars and say, okay, well, now I'm going to pick a Model S and X now. It's a great upgrade from the 3 and Y. for many people who are 3 or Y customers. And I think really it has a lot of the stuff that the upgraded Model 3 and Y have that, actually debuted on the new S and X. So for people who are looking for some of the new features like the rear screen and stuff like that, the ventilated seats, the Model S and X already have them, and I think that could be part of the reason why we saw more people choosing the S and X.
One thing I saw Tesla mention in their 2023 recap video yesterday was that they said the Model Y was the best-selling car in the world, and then they put sort of the source of that at the bottom. I was not able to verify that yet, so I'm not tweeting it out yet. I'm gonna wait for the more traditional verification methods before I do that. But if they're gonna make that claim, why don't they just tell us how many they actually sold? Like, they don't like to break out how many Model Ys versus 3s they sold. They bunch them together. But I would just, like, tell them, if you're gonna make that claim, like, come out, like, puff your shoulders up a bit, like, tell us how many units you sold. It's, like, a huge feat. It's the first EV to ever do this. I think they should be just at least one time, just be transparent on how many just Model Ys you sold. Maybe they can't because they have earnings coming up, so maybe they'll tell us then, but they should tell us.
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple thoughts. I would say on two specific things about, um, or at least two conversations that were had around that. The first being the Wall Street expectations around the Cybertruck, which with anyone with knowledge of the scenario just were nonsensical. Um, there was one analyst at 4,993 deliveries. Like, what is he even? What is he reading to come up with that conclusion? Just it didn't make sense. So what happens occasionally is, you know, Wall Street will get exposure to a new product that a company is launching or a new vertical that they're exploring, and a few analysts on the street will either by virtue of ignorance or failure to do due diligence come up with an absurd expectation, and then it's in the company's hand really to manage those expectations effectively. There were some criticisms yesterday. I think it was James and a few others that posted it that I replied to, that were saying basically like, "Oh, come on, it's lame that you're not sharing the Cybertruck expectations." But I disagree with that. I think that it's the right thing to do. And you can call it obscuring the numbers, you can call it, pooling the numbers, whatever terminology you want to use. But the reality is that needed to be done, because if it was not done, then there would certainly be hundreds of headlines that said Tesla Cybertruck deliveries miss by 3,000 units. And that's a nonsensical headline. So to avoid that, Tesla's team, I think, made the correct decision to not disclose those deliveries at this time. I know there's some people that disagree with that, but that's my view on that. And then the other thing is, I saw some people yesterday saying that it was underwhelming in their view that Tesla barely beat delivery expectations because of the price cuts. That's also a nonsensical thing to say, because the expectations were in light of the price cuts. So yeah, that's about all I can say on that topic. But I just wanted to address those two things. That the expectations did change, and with respect to the price cuts, the analysts who put out those expectations were aware of the price cuts. So it's, Tesla beating those expectations is in light of all of the available information. It's not that they should have had a higher number because of the price cuts. Still have to factor in all the other macroeconomic factors that were at play last year. So, yeah, that's my view on those two specific, I guess, contentions that were being put out the last couple days. But sorry, I saw you on mute. Did you want to jump in with something?
I was just gonna say, a lot of analysts will put out their estimates early in the quarter, and they'll give a breakdown of each model, and sometimes they don't update those by the end of the quarter, which is why you had one analyst estimate as high as 5,000 Cybertruck deliveries for Q4, literally 3 days ago, which makes no sense because we know for a fact we have drone videos flying every day, drones flying every day at the Giga Texas. We can see what's coming out of the factory roughly. So, and we know there weren't 5,000. There would be a massive amount of truckloads moving out of there. So, yeah, it's just stupid.
Yeah, that's another great point as well, is that a lot of times, either by virtue again of laziness, ignorance, or just failure to do so, that those expectations are very often not updated either. Yep, that's Another good point. So we'll transition away from deliveries a little bit here then, and maybe go into some of the Cybertruck parts content conversation. I know Sawyer's put out a few tweets the last couple days about Ford kind of boasting about how American made their SUV is, but really Cybertruck is the most, sorry, not SUV, a pickup truck, but really, Cybertruck is the most American-made electric pickup truck out there. And so, yeah, sorry, if you want to dive into that a little bit more, I think that's an interesting topic to touch on as well before we go into some of the other Cybertruck content.
Yeah, so I should clarify, the data that I used in my post was for 2023, and that had the most complete data with the most amount of trucks. And in that 2023 data, the Honda Ridgeline had 65% US Canada parts content, which is essentially matched the Cybertruck, but I think it had a little bit more, the Cybertruck had a little bit more overall North American parts content. However, with the 2024 NHTSA data, NHTSA, the Ridgeline actually has 70% parts content. So even though the Cybertruck is the most American-made truck in its class, the Ridgeline actually is just slightly number one over the Cybertruck. Um, Again, that's 2023 data. I don't know if like Tesla will increase the U.S. Canada parts content this year. Nonetheless, 65 is really good. I imagine that means overall it has 90% North American parts content, which I think will be good enough for to be in the top 10 of most American-made vehicles once that list comes out. Usually that comes out in like June, I think, from Cars.com. But their list takes into account more than just that. They have like 5 different categories, including like where the employees are and like where the drivetrain and stuff is manufactured. So it's more than just parts content. But nonetheless, it's great to see this that the Cybertruck is 90% North American. It's built in America. And Ford during a few months ago, they like to think they want you to think that they're the most American car manufacturer, but their parts content, U.S. and Canada, for the Ford F-150 Lightning for 2024 is under 25% versus 65% for the Cybertruck. So, which is why they say assembled in America. It used to be most made in America, but they changed that to assemble later on. So yeah, I hope Tesla does some sort of advertising with this because I think it'd be good for people to know how American their trucks are. I mean, all their vehicles are really.
If the UAW keeps up, it may not even be assembled in America for much longer either. No, I'm just kidding. Omar, go for it. Have any thoughts on the Cybertruck parts content, or even on?
Yeah, I mean, it's not surprising. The S3 X and Y are the number one, two, three, and four most American-made vehicles on the market. So it's not surprising that we're seeing the same thing with Cybertruck as well. People often say, people really, I think, don't appreciate this about Tesla. They often say that Tesla's a foreign automaker, that their cars are coming out of China, when the reality is every car sold in the United States is made in the United States, which you can't really say from any other automaker that sells cars in the US.
The the EV sale disparity between GM, Ford, Tesla, that's probably worth touching on as well, right? All these headlines
Yeah.
coming out today about record sales, or sorry, not record sales, but highest since 2020 for Ford. People getting really bulled up on Legacy Auto today. Why don't we lead them into a little bit of a reality check with that on the EV comparison? Sawyer, if you have any thoughts on that particularly.
In Q4, Tesla sold roughly 171,000 EVs in the US. Ford did about 26,000, and then GM did about 19,500. GM, of course, is a leader in everything always. So, but Tesla sold about 3.7 times as many EVs in the US in the fourth quarter as Ford and GM combined. But this makes Ford number two. They sold about twice as many Lightnings in Q4 as they did in 2024. I mean 2022 Q4. So good growth there. We'll see if that continues. Probably won't, considering they said they were going to cut production output by 50% this year for that model. Um, Also, they raised like Lightning prices yesterday for the base models by up to 10,000, and then they chopped prices by up to 7,000 for the more expensive trims. Um, the most expensive trims don't affect people too much as much as the cheaper ones do. But interesting moves by Ford. They put out their press release, touting that they're the number two EV maker in the U.S. Um, I don't know where GM goes from here because the Bolt's going to stop deliveries soon. So I guess they just really have to ramp up their new EVs quickly.
Yep, yep. That'll definitely be interesting to watch, especially considering the rhetoric that we've seen this year from Legacy Auto around these perceived slowdowns in investment, perceived slowdowns in launch of new vehicles. We saw a big drop off in orders for battery related metals from a lot of legacy OEMs this year. So it's going to be really, really interesting to watch the next few years how their foot works around the pedal, and how willing they are to push or buck this trend of EV adoption. Because I think broadly, they have a chance to help accelerate adoption. But if they don't participate meaningfully the way that people thought they were going to, even as recently as 2021, then I think that actually creates a bigger vacuum of opportunity for Tesla. So, in a way, it's kind of a win-win for Tesla, I think, when it comes to legacy participation, because if they don't, again, that leaves a bigger vacuum of market for Tesla. And if they do, I think it leads to greater adoption, which is good for the leader in the space, as well. One interesting story I think from today that's probably worth mentioning, or if not touching on or discussing, is that story you shared, Sawyer, about the big car makers lobbying the UK, um, to weaken or delay electric car rules, which is kind of in the vein of this same conversation around the idea of, legacy auto, pausing the gas, if you will, when it comes to their EV initiatives. But I thought that story was really interesting. For those that missed Sawyer's tweet, it was Toyota, Jaguar Land Rover, and Nissan. They were asking for delays in these zero emission benchmarks that are being put out by the UK, calling them unfair. And Volkswagen and Tesla, were arguing against that leniency. So I thought that was a really interesting piece of news. Not that anyone didn't expect that was happening. I mean, I'm sure we all expect that was happening to a degree, but kind of a little anecdote there of how they're pulling out all the stops here to try to participate.
Toyota has a history of doing this. They've done this for years in every country that has these EV targets and global emissions targets. And that's because Toyota has had a horrible EV strategy. They've been putting it off for years because they didn't think EVs would catch on or be the future. They were all in on ICE vehicles, hybrids, and even they were touting hydrogen vehicles. I think only now they're starting to see, oh crap, like we kind of sat on our hands too long. So they're trying to speed up their EV development. But they're essentially trying to lobby these governments against these new rules because they know they can't meet them, whereas a lot of other manufacturers can meet them. So VW, Tesla, Ford, they were all argued for these mandates should be tougher. But Toyota, Jaguar, Land Rover, and Nissan lobbied the opposite, which is, it sucks to see because this is good, I think, for the planet, the environment, and for the EV movement. But because these automakers chose to sit on their hands too long, they're lobbying it against it.
Yeah, I mean, there's been this big narrative push that consumers don't want EVs, EV sales are slowing down, and this whole thing was just a big mistake. And I think it really stems from tightening regulations and increasing corporate average fuel economy requirements. I mean, these type of EV mandates or fuel efficiency restrictions really, they could be devastating to legacy automakers. We're talking about billions and billions of dollars in costs, dealing with fines and having to invest into cleaner technology, putting parts on their cars to decrease emission standards. It's potentially devastating for them. So you have this huge narrative that, well, EV sales are slowing, consumers don't want them, they're just not ready yet. But the data just doesn't support it. You have the Model Y as the best-selling electric car in the world. It's the first time, or sorry, the best-selling vehicle model in the world of any kind. It's the first time an electric vehicle has taken the top of the list. BYD in 2023 sold more battery electric vehicles than hybrids for the first time. I mean, BEV sales are just taking off like crazy. And, Ford and GM, they're in a very distant second to Tesla in US sales. So I think it's just interesting the difference between the sort of narrative that legacy automakers have been pushing, that there's a slowdown, and the reality that adoption is kind of taking off like crazy, especially around the world.
Yep. No, I think that that's a great way to put it. The other thing I think we can touch on, which is probably at the front of a lot of people's mind, is the transition of the EV tax credit this year to directly to point of sale, and also the numerous changes that have come not only in eligible vehicles but also in some of the issuance dynamics. So a couple things that I obviously noticed right off the bat was that Tesla's able to offer it direct to consumer even without the dealership model, and that the Model 3 long range and rear wheel drive both lost their access to the $7,500 credit. I think there was also a story yesterday that GM is going to offer direct in-house $7,500 discounts for the EVs that are not eligible. But I know there were a number of other changes. Sawyer, if you wanted to touch on some of those changes that you think were important, or that are worth knowing for people, I think that'd be a good place to start. And then Omar, your thoughts as well on the changes.
Yeah, GM can do that, but Tesla can't. I mean, Tesla's margins have already come down quite a bit, and they've already cut prices a lot. I think they could potentially reduce the Model 3 rear-wheel drive and long-range prices by a few thousand and increase Model Y prices by a few thousand, sort of create a bigger gap between the two. Because right now the pricing just makes no sense with some Model Ys cheaper than some Model 3s, including the credit. So, but yeah, I think right now the reason Tesla is not offering the point of sale rebate is because the government's treasuries is like the system you have to sign up for as a dealer or an online manufacturer is just crashing. It's like a lot of people I know, a used EV car dealership owner reached out to me a couple days ago and said, I signed up for a month ago and I haven't been approved yet. And he emailed the IRS and said, yeah, like we're dealing with a lot of issues. Like we're working on a fix now. So I suspect this is why Tesla didn't want to do it or hasn't even been approved yet. Is just because this horrible government website that just doesn't work well. So hopefully they fix that. I imagine in the next week or two at most they'll get this going because this is costing sales for Tesla. People are delaying their deliveries. I've just got another DM as we were opening this room about someone delaying their delivery for their Model Y Performance because they can't get the point of sale rebate yet. Um, but in general, this new point of sale rebate enables an estimated 250 million Americans, up from 75 million in 2023, to get a $7,500 discount directly off the purchase price of a Tesla. And essentially, to use this point of sale rebate, you will need to tell Tesla you'd like to have the rebate as a point of sale rebate used towards your down payment or something related. And then the same income limits that applied in 2023 will still apply in 2024. Um, and unlike in 2023, if your modified adjusted gross income is below the threshold in one of the previous 2 years, or this year, previous year rather, you can use the full $7,500 point of sale rebate regardless of your tax liability, and the IRS won't require you to pay back any amount later. Again, as long as Tesla transfer that rebate to you directly. So this would be a big deal. Again, 75 million Americans were able to use the credit last year. They had enough tax liability to do so. But anyone that had tax liability less than that, they couldn't use the full amount. That changes this year. So up to 250 million Americans can use it. And that's just absolutely massive. So hopefully Tesla can figure this out, or the government's website people can figure this out, because this is costing really everybody sales, to be honest.
Yeah, I think the point of sale rebate is going to be huge. And when the EV tax credit debuted this year, it really didn't have the maximum stimulative effect I think it could have had, just because it's so complicated to claim the tax credit. And are you actually going to get it back? Do you have an income that's not too high but not too low. It was just very complicated. This dramatically simplifies the system, and frankly, it's really how it should have worked since the beginning when they debuted this in the Obama era. So I think this is going to be very exciting. Yes, there have been some early hiccups. I saw that, it looked like the site was down for some of the dealers. There were some frustrated people and dealers, but I would hope that Tesla gets on board with this very quickly. Hopefully even tonight if they make some changes. On pricing, a lot of people say they have to raise the Model Y prices or lower the Model 3 prices because the pricing doesn't make sense. But I mean, what difference does it really make to Tesla if the pricing makes sense, quote unquote, right? I mean, some people qualify for the credit, some people don't. If people are actually buying Tesla's more expensive products because they're cheaper due to some models qualifying for the tax credit and some not, I mean, how does that really harm Tesla? They could just shift the allocation towards Model 3 performance and towards Model Y as they already have, and maybe even have a higher margin profile than they would have otherwise. So we'll see what pricing changes they make. I think it could be an interesting few Thursdays here where they usually update their pricing. Um, but I think we'll probably see some changes there along with the introduction of the point of sale credit directly through Tesla's system. And also, I wanted to thank Gary Goralnik. He's a Tesla investor. He owns a Tesla. He loves Tesla, and he's supporting the show today. He has a technology called Shop and Ride that allows you to shop in your car, your autonomous car, and have the item picked up. And he's patented it, and he wants to give this patent to Tesla. So if someone at Tesla wants to get in touch with him, I pinned his tweet up at the top. And thank you, Gary, for supporting this episode of Tesla Talk.
That's actually sounds really cool, Gary. So that's awesome to hear. And hopefully, I'm sure there are some people from Tesla in the crowd. So hopefully, somebody reaches out to him and explores it and sees if it interests Tesla. But that's a very cool thing to point out. Um, Another thing I think we can briefly touch on is the Tesla lithium refinery, which Sawyer quote tweeted a post. I think it was 2 or 3 days ago of a video of it, and it looks like the construction's coming along swimmingly. And it's been, what, not very long since they've announced it now.
Hmm.
Um, these projects typically take several years to get up and running. And they Corpus Christi, where it's being built, actually is funnily where I went to high school. So it's a cool little coincidence there, but it's a nice little quaint South Texas town. It's a cool place to hang out, I guess. But it's a 1,200 plus acre site. It's going to have 1,000 plus employees at the site, 250 full time employees. And yeah, the construction looks good so far. But Sawyer, any thoughts on that initially? And
Yeah,
Omar?
I'll just add, even if they get close to quote unquote completing it, it's still going to take a couple of years for them to reach full like volume
Yeah,
output there.
absolutely. Yep.
But Tesla Senior Manager of Operations Jason Bevan, I think is the last name, said in October of last year, 2023, that we will begin commissioning the assets roughly the first half of next year, which is 2024. And then Tesla will start ramping up production in the latter half of 2024. Um, and then Drew, I think, touched on this in I think the Q3 or Q2 earnings call that it would take a little while to do volume production, but that some level of production would start this year. So it's good to see they're making progress. This is the first time we've seen any structure be up. So it's good to see progress.
Yeah, domestic sourcing is really becoming, as we've seen with the Model 3 standard and long range losing the credit this year. So scaling 4680 and having a high percentage of domestic content, being able to refine that lithium locally, it's going to be really important to them remaining competitive. And I think that these investments that they're making are really going to pay themselves off many times over in the future. as we have this sort of 10-year EV tax credit plan. So I think it's super exciting to see them making progress on this.
Yeah, as the Inflation Reduction Act EV rebate requirements get tougher and tougher, it will be more increasingly important every single year to bring everything you can from a production standpoint to the US. Every single year from now on, I think the parts content based in the US or North America, I gotta find the exact language, has to be 10% higher every year. Right now it's 50%, I think, and the next year 60, 70%, year after 80%, so on and so forth until it's 100%. So this is why a lot of EVs lost the tax credit this year. Um, but yeah, continue to localize production, sourcing, materials will be extremely important.
Yep, I completely agree. So we can transition a little bit here, I guess, to some questions, unless there's any other topics that you guys want to touch on before we do that.
I'll just
Uh,
touch on two, which is Tesla's entire global fleet of about 5.5 million vehicles is now driving an estimated 50 billion miles a year. That's like a lot of real world miles, a lot of data that Tesla can pull from to make their cars better. Um, and then I saw that EV maker Fisker today announced that they're going to start adding dealerships alongside its direct to consumer distribution model to expand its sales and delivery network. I think this is a mistake. It's going to cost them a lot, introduces complexity. They're already not in a great financial position. So I don't know. I don't,
I mean, Fisker's like a total shit show right now. The
yeah.
company's kind of a disaster. The guy's, Henrik Fisker's wife is the CFO, and they've now said that there may be some issues with their accounting. And, it's just a disaster. They can't sell these cars. They've had a huge issue with distribution. Um, they're kind of cheap, plasticky cars. So, I mean, I'm not really sure what the future is for this company. He already sort of blew up his last EV startup, and I don't think this one's going to do much better.
I
I
think
wouldn't be
Faraday
s-
Future too is in hot water. Both of those companies.
I wouldn't be surprised if in a few years he's started another EV company, and that one fails too. But other interesting news on the AI side, Mobileye had released some terrible guidance this morning. Their stock is down, I think, 25% this morning in trading after they said that automakers have a inventory buildup of their chips. And so revenue's coming in dramatically below forecast. So that's kind of interesting. Mobileye is kind of one of the primary competitors to Tesla Autopilot in the ADAS space, selling to other automakers. They're the most valuable publicly traded company in Israel. So it kind of shows some of the issues with their business model where they're selling these chips to automakers, but they might have inventory buildup as opposed to Tesla that really sells the software directly to consumers. And, Goldman estimates they've got over $3 billion. We also saw FSD 12.1 start to roll out to 15,000 Tesla employees. This is, I think, potentially one of the most significant things to happen to Tesla. Really, to show strong growth, it would be very helpful if FSD just took off in terms of its adoption. And there's a lot of people who love using FSD 11, but it's also very robotic. It can be very annoying at times if you use it often. Some of the hesitations or slowing down or just generally robotic driving. So V12 from the early reviews looks like it's going to be a massive improvement. It's gone out fairly widely to Tesla employees, and I'm looking forward to it potentially going out to the first early access testers this month.
Yeah,
yeah,
I just
great.
got to give a shout out to the people in the comments. They're like commenting with photos of them listening to this podcast live on their Apple Watch from like the little speakers on the Apple Watch. Shout out to you guys.
Yeah, that was so awesome to see that. It's actually super cool. I haven't listened to a space on my watch, so I didn't know that it popped up with the logo. But yeah, that's awesome. We appreciate you guys commenting that. It's just cool to see. Um, so yeah, we'll throw it over to the audience now. The way we like to do this, guys, is either for you guys to pose a topic for us to touch on or a question. Um, if you guys want to thank us for the show and all that sweet stuff, we appreciate that. But just in the last 30 minutes here, we like to keep it topical. So if there is something cool you want to ask us about, or an interesting question you want to pose, or an interesting topic you want to bring up, that's kind of what this last segment is usually for on the show. So I just wanted to clarify that. But yeah, if you are interested in the audience to ask a question or bring up a topic, there's two ways you can do it. The preferable way is you go to the bottom left corner of your screen, hit that little mic button, and you'll request to speak, and we'll bring you up here. And then alternatively, you can just comment directly on the space in the bottom right corner. But we will get to the people with verbal questions first. So again, that is the preferred route. So if you have a question or comment, go to the bottom left corner of your screen, click that mic, and we'll bring you up here. Rotus, what's going on, buddy?
Hey, how you guys doing? Thanks for starting this space. You guys are doing great work. A couple questions. I'm Nigerian. I did, got my economics degree at University of Houston way back when. But I'm back home now. I cover business news, so I cover a lot of tech, especially on Fridays on my show. And so we got a new government in place, and they're trying to attract foreign direct investment. And Nigeria has lithium. And I think when I tuned in, I heard it was either was it Holmars or was it Sawyer or someone was talking about mining lithium locally, which is important. I get that. What, have you heard of Tesla looking to other countries to set up, you know, lithium sites to try to mine, in other countries? That's one. And then two, the Financial Times had a story where they said senior Trump advisors say that if he is reelected this November, he will repeal the Inflation Reduction Act. I'm wondering what you guys think, the kind of impact that would have on EV sales. Thanks a lot. I don't think lithium mining is necessarily an issue from the standpoint of there's plenty of it around the world. The US actually has a lot of lithium. I believe a few years ago, Tesla purchased a 10,000 acre plot of land around the Nevada area that was rich in lithium deposits. I don't know if they've done anything with it since then, but I think Elon was more saying the most important thing that we have a lack of right now is refining, lithium refining. And I think this is why we've seen Tesla get into that themselves, even though I think they didn't want to. It's just because no one else is doing it and they need a lot of scale quickly. So I think Tesla themselves want to stay away from mining as much as possible and partner with others that can go into different countries or different areas and do it themselves. Um, but I'm not sure if they have I don't know if they have a lithium shortage. I think they're fine on that. It's just more the refining, I think, is the issue.
Yeah, I mean, really, you kind of had an issue where, um, lithium is pretty much everywhere, right? And so anyone can sort of mine lithium. You take these rocks. I mean, not everywhere that has lithium has much of a lithium mining industry, but you can go mine the lithium. You basically get these big rocks, and these rocks have lithium in them, but they also have other stuff in them. So then you need to take them and refine them to a high grade of purity for battery grade lithium. And then you can start to put them into cells. So the bottleneck in the past few years during the pandemic was really in the refining capacity because you had so many people make all of these EV promises that the futures market for refined lithium basically just sent it to eye-watering levels. So there was a little bit of an issue there. I think that's why Tesla decided to set up their own lithium refinery. But that's eased somewhat now that some of these automakers are now walking back on their EV promises. So really lithium mining is important, but also refining it into battery grade material is key. If I were to give any advice to uh, business owners in your country, it would be don't just do the mining, but refine it on site too. And then you'll have customers from EV battery cell makers all over the world.
Yeah, as far as global supply chain is concerned, what I'll comment on that is that the Tesla's priority as far as global expansion goes should be about production and distribution of their products. That's where their focus should be, and that's where their focus is. As far as building gigafactories in other countries goes, or as far as seeking market penetration in other countries goes, that's an appropriate focus, and that's where the focus is. But as far as their involvement in lithium goes, that's not where they want their logistical focus to be. I mean, that's not their problem, frankly. The lithium industry has enough of an incentive to figure that out, and they will figure that out. As demand increases further and further year over year. Even though this year over year, the jump in demand was significantly less than it was over the last 2 years, lithium demand will continue to increase, and that'll provide the incentive necessary for the biggest lithium manufacturers in the world and the biggest battery grade refiners in the world to build the necessary global infrastructure and localized infrastructure. So I don't think that should be Tesla's focus, or that it is Tesla's focus as far as that goes. And as far as what was the second question again?
It was the Financial Times had an article saying they spoke with senior Trump advisors, saying if he wins
Oh,
this
right, about
November, yeah, the
repealing the
Inflation
IRA.
Reduction Act, he'll repeal it.
Yeah, yeah. So I don't think that would be as easy to do as some people might assume. I mean, maybe they could, but I mean, funds have already started to be allocated, grants have already gone out, the ball is already rolling on that, and there's also a national security undertone to both that piece of legislation and the chips bill that I think will make them less, I guess, political than people think they are. I think both those pieces of legislation, the reason they pass and the reason they'll be very difficult to repeal is because there's an enormous amount of not only corporate incentive, but domestic manufacturing incentive that's involved in both those pieces of legislation. And both of those domestic manufacturing incentives tend to be in technology sensitive industries, if you will, like, you know, new age next generation industries, right? Chips and electric vehicles. And so it's in the United States competitive interest to have that funding versus, let's say, a competitor like China that basically has immediate and endless access to direct funding for those types of programs. So I don't think the probability of that happening is high, in my view, from an incentive perspective. But it may just be a political, it may be a political statement that his campaign is making to try to, like, say, look, we'll be more fiscally responsible, we're going to repeal this $1 trillion piece of legislation. I think in reality it's very, very unlikely to be repealed, that or the chips bill. So yeah, that's my
Yeah.
Whether
I
any
mean,
parts of the IRA get like taken out or become not don't become law anymore, it will depend on if the Republicans gain control of both the House and the Senate this fall, and if there is a Republican president or not. But also, I think the government underestimates how much this point of sale rebate is going to cost them over time. I think if you're selling millions of EVs a year in the US, you're talking about tens of billions of dollars that the government is going to have to pay back, I guess, to people. But this is like a
tens of
10-year.
billions of dollars is chump change for them.
Yeah,
These
but I
guys
think
have a
it adds up
trillion
quick.
dollar deficit.
Yeah, but I think they underestimate the amount of EVs that are going to be sold. But it's a 10-year long credit, so we'll see what happens.
Look, here are my thoughts on this. First off, obviously the EV tax credit and these IRA provisions are not going to last forever. Personally, I think some of these provisions are so bizarre. Well, your EV needs to be made in North America. Unless you're leasing, then you can get it. And oh, well, this model qualifies, but not that model. It just honestly distorts the market so much that I say just get rid of all subsidies. Get rid of fossil fuel subsidies, get rid of EV subsidies, and we don't really need them at the end of the day. EV's success is not dependent on these tax credits. You look at what happened when Tesla lost the tax credit in 2019. Did they stop growing? No, far from it. But of course, they're helpful. I think the production side credits are helpful. I think the consumer side credits are helpful. But the president alone cannot repeal something. They need the support of Congress as well, right? So Trump famously, when he was president the last time, said, "We're going to repeal Obamacare." And he tried to repeal Obamacare a few times. They made some minor changes to it, but overwhelmingly, a lot of the legislation stayed, right? And so he didn't have the support of Congress to do that, right? Now, what they've done with the IRA is actually very interesting, where they have a bill where the money is overwhelmingly benefiting Republican congressional districts because of those locations being some of the best places to set up these battery factories. And you've seen an enormous amount of money committed to expanding battery manufacturing in the US. So the Democrats like the bill because they like EVs and clean energy and all that. The Republicans in Congress, they like the bill because it's sending more money into their constituencies. So I think for that reason, it could be a little bit more difficult to get the bill repealed than we think, even if a Republican does take the White House.
Yeah, yeah, it's important to understand that there's, it's a lot of stuff is just said for political campaign purposes to, you know, I'm not making a political statement in one direction or the other. I'm just saying to me, it's very unlikely that that piece of legislation is repealed. There's an enormous amount of corporate incentive, and corporate incentive tends to win out in this country on both sides of the political aisle. So, yeah, there's $1 trillion worth of incentive in that piece of legislation alone. That's a lot of money. So yeah, that's kind of my holistic view on whether or not that's going to be repealed. Based, you're next. What's up?
Hey, so two questions. One is a really just a simple question because I bought a Tesla and I've got a question about it. But the other one is I want to get the presenter's thoughts on legacy automakers. Tesla has done a great job of forcing the shift to EV specific platforms. So I know Jim Farley was tweeting about, their next models were going to be EV specific platforms, not shared platforms between combustion vehicles and EVs. And then, Toyota is doing a global EV platform with the gigacasting. Which legacy automakers, because this is going to be obviously like insanely expensive, what are your thoughts on which legacy automakers are best prepared and which ones are least prepared for this transition, not just to EVs, but to EV specific platforms? And then my second question is just on that tax credit. I did not receive that when I bought my Model 3 on the 31st. Is that something that Tesla takes care of for me, or will I have to file that with my taxes?
If it's in 2023, you'll file it with your taxes, and you have to make sure you're eligible too.
Yeah, basically, when you do your taxes, if you're using TurboTax or something, just mention that you bought an EV. As long as your income's below 300,000 joint, 150,000 single, you should be able to qualify for it. And then your taxes will just be reduced by 7,500.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Awesome. Luis, you're next.
Hi guys, very well. Thank you for the space to talk about it. Quite quickly, two things. One, I don't know if you guys are on what's happening in Argentina, but Milei, which has won the presidency, he passed a huge reform with roughly 300 laws. Inside of that package, there's the something related to the autonomous vehicle. So he tells on that law that if the stats claim that the autonomous car will be more safe than drivers, then automatically it will be approved in Argentina. So somehow, if I don't know if he has the votes in Parliament, but he already told everybody that because it's a 300 package law, that if he doesn't get the approval from the Senate or whatever they call it over there, he's going to do a vote through the people, because there's a lot of things in the stake for Argentina. So that could be an interesting piece to actually get the first robo taxis going. On the other hand, knowing the way that the Cybertruck is assembled, I think for me, I do have some knowledge of car manufacturing and manufacturing in general. What they are doing is probably they are testing 80% of what's going to be the boxed production method. What do you think about that part? Thank you very much.
So I'll make one quick comment about Argentina. I wasn't aware of that specifically, but it's a pretty insignificant car market globally. I think roughly they're doing like under 500K sales annually. So yeah, that's just kind of my view on that, maybe not being that significant. But Sawyer, Omar, I don't know if you guys have thoughts on that or the other point he brought up.
Well, in terms of like robo taxis being there, we're still a ways away in the U.S. from that happening, let alone like the rest of Europe, like China. So I even if he does approve it, I'm sure he'll look at the data and be like, yeah, it's good, but it's going to be a while before that country gets it. It's going to be a while before the U.S. probably has it.
Well, I mean, I use driverless cars in San Francisco all the time, and some of the data we have shows that injury causing crashes have been reduced by 80%, for example, with Waymo's deployment. They've looked at some of the insurance data. So I think the data will be pretty compelling. It may take a while to scale to Argentina, as Sawyer pointed out, but I do definitely believe that the data is going to be unequivocal. And as regulators around the world see it, they're going to realize that this is the most significant technology for crash reduction, even before autonomy, even just on the AI active safety side, since really the seatbelt and the airbag. As a matter of fact, I think even on an active safety basis, it'll save more lives than the seatbelt and the airbag combined. So I expect regulators around the world to sort of embrace this technology just as it has been in the US and China.
Okay, thank you very much.
It's just like they're like both Sawyer and Omar alluded to. If and when that's going to happen, it's much more likely to happen either in the United States or in China first. Um, them being the biggest car markets in the world, B, the most technologically advanced and wealthy nations in the world, that's likely they will likely lead that theme like they lead every other technological theme. So I kind of agree with that as well. So that's probably where you want to be looking, regardless of what's in Argentina's legislation or any of those other countries as well. Okay, we'll do one last question here, and then we'll wrap it up. Silicon, you're next, or Silicon, Silicon, Silicon. You there? Silicon. Okay, looks like he's not there. We will wrap it up here. Like we said earlier, guys, this runs every Thursday from 1 p.m. Eastern to 2 p.m. Eastern. We try to keep it tight, try to keep it covering the main topics of the week on Tesla and occasionally SpaceX, like we did with FCC Commissioner Carr. We try to keep you guys in the loop with what's happening and bring you some interesting conversations and opinions around the recent events. So if you guys like the show, make sure you're following the Tesla Talk host account up here. The account I'm speaking from, we're almost at 3,000 followers on that account, which is awesome. We appreciate all of you who go in and follow. It's an easy account to have notifications on for as well, in case you forget about our Thursday space, even though it's at the same time every Thursday. There's no tweets that come out of this account, so you're never going to get bugged with tweets. Just spaces links once a week. It's a pretty easy, low effort follow that's not going to bug you or cloud your timeline. So we appreciate all of you who jump in and follow the Tesla Talk account. The handle is at We Talk Tesla. Again, at We Talk Tesla. We'll see you guys next week at 1 p.m. Eastern to talk about the events of the next week. We hope you guys enjoy it. We appreciate all of you for tuning in, and we'll see you then.
Yeah, thanks everybody for joining. And thanks again to Gary Goralnik. His shop and ride technology could be a huge new revenue stream for Tesla. So go give him a follow, check that out. And thanks everybody for tuning once again. We'll see you next week on Thursday at the same time.